Okay, we've got quite a few of the RSVPs have arrived. We've got 32 participants, and we want to make the best use of everyone's time, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm Celia McAdam. I'm with AIM Consulting. We are working with the El Dorado County Transportation Commission and City of Placerville team on the US 50 Corridor Action Plan. And so welcome to our third workshop. If Jerry, you want to start the PowerPoint with the first screen? Again, here we are, public workshop number 3, and thank you all for attending. Okay, next slide. Important to know how you can participate in this virtual workshop. You may have noticed that everyone has been muted upon entry, and so that really helps to limit all the background noise that can happen in one of these meetings. And throughout this meeting, if you have questions that come up, please feel free to use the chat box feature to share any questions or comments, and we will go through those during the question and answer portion of the presentation. And so how you know how to do this is there's a chat feature that is down at the bottom. You can see here, if you have a computer, it's shown that way. Once we get to the question and answer portion of the meeting, if you have additional questions or comments, we will then use the raise hand feature, or you can also use chat as well. And if you're calling on your phone, you would press the *9 to raise your hand, and then *6 to unmute when you're called on. Okay. Hopefully everybody's got that. I want to do a quick introduction of our project team. Rebecca Neves is here from the City of Placerville. If she's there waving. Jerry Barton will be the key presenter here today. He is a senior transportation planner with the El Dorado County Transportation Commission, and waving there. And then also from the AIM team, we have Katie Owen and Dana Davenport, who will be assisting in making sure that the chat functions work, your questions are brought up to the team for answers. And if you have any technical issues, put that in the chat, and we can try and help you through those. So with that, our next slide is our agenda. And you can see we have quite a bit.
Whoa, sorry about that.
Oh, there we go. We have quite a bit to cover here in this, what we're thinking is going to be an hour-and-a-half program. But if our time runs out, we will still stay to answer any questions that you may have. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jerry to start the presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you everyone for spending your evening with us. I am Jerry Barton. I'm as Celia said, a senior transportation planner with the El Dorado County Transportation Commission, and a lot of detail in this presentation, so won't bore you with anything else. We'll stay focused on the task at hand. Today, we're going to present the components of the US 50 Corridor Action Plan. There are 3 key components to this study, and they are the system user travel analysis, which essentially is kind of taking a look at the travel patterns on the 50 corridor, and we'll go into detail on that. Investment strategy options for the 50 corridor if we were going to pursue some type of infrastructure project. And then the access control action plan, which is essentially the work that went behind the scenes to make the trip to green evolution happen. Access control essentially is what you see happening on the 50 corridor with the signalized intersection. And that's kind of the technical terminology for it. So just wanted to give that background. This will be a high level presentation for the draft plan, which will be released in the early part of March. So the study area of the plan is really encompasses all of the US 50 corridor, which starts just down in West Sacramento and extends all the way through Placerville to Lake Tahoe and well beyond, all the way to Ocean City, Maryland, in fact. And we are focused on travelers destined for US 50 that might start their trip in the Bay Area, and also travelers that are on US 50 headed to Placerville from the Sacramento metropolitan area. And then we had a particular emphasis on the downtown Placerville area where freeway traffic is converted to a local street option and access is controlled by the 3 signalized intersections. So the purpose of the study, I kind of alluded to the 3 reasons 3 components of the study, but it really is surrounded around congestion and the impacts of congestion to Placerville. The city of Placerville, obviously US 50 being the major corridor it is, there are extraordinary backups that take place on US 50 in Placerville as a result of the 3 signals. So much so that with new technology and apps and location type data, people are able to use Google Waze and those types of things to avoid the stoplights, further impacting local residents in the city of Placerville through congestion that is on local streets during peak period times. And that affects people who live in the city of Placerville, have concerns about being able to access local businesses, running errands, those types of things, and then also concerns about emergency access and response times in the event of an evacuation or other type of emergency. Through this planning effort, we reviewed historical plans, improvements, and trends that have taken place over the last few decades. Beginning in the early 90s, there was a project study report that considered grade separation. Basically, there would be no signals on the city of Placerville, and it was a really large-scale project that depressed the roadway, and there were local overcrossings at the local streets. And this project was contemplated in the late 90s, but at the time, the city of Placerville in general, the residents and others, including local business owners, just didn't have the appetite for moving that project forward. It wasn't something, there were a lot of concerns about the large-scale construction project and the impacts on the city of Placerville that would have. So that project was not pursued. Over time, in the early 2000s, the Highway 50 Operational Improvements Project was completed, and that constructed a eastbound auxiliary lane. So just one additional lane in the eastbound direction. That's the 3-lane piece that goes through Placerville now. And then also constructed improvements at each of the intersections over the bridges over Hangtown Creek, and then connected Placerville Drive to Lower Main Street in the western part of the town. A little further down the line, in 2020, the US 50 hotspot study was conducted, and it evaluated a number of different traffic management strategies, including large-scale infrastructure projects, and it had a very involved public outreach effort accompanied with it. And what it determined was that people in the city of Placerville were to a point where they were beginning to experience traffic in a different way than they were in the late 90s, beginning to find that it was affecting their daily life and trips they needed to make in and around Placerville, in particular on weekends, holidays, et cetera, Apple Hill season. And it really seemed that the public sentiment toward a project had shifted. So the Trip to Green concept was born out of that US 50 hotspot study. And so we kind of followed it up with this US 50 corridor action plan and studied some other options as well. So moving along, study schedule, really, I just wanted to show this slide most notably because this project was unfortunately delayed due to the Caldor fire. We had intended on conducting the Trip to Green pilot in the fall of 2021, but that wasn't able to take place. However, some of the maps and detour alignments and routes were completed at that time, and we were able to implement Trip to Green as an emergency evacuation for the Caldor fire. So that was somewhat of a blessing in disguise in terms of just learning about how Trip to Green might work. And it really helped us kind of set the stage for the implementation of the proof of concept project in 2022. Important to note who the project partners are for this planning effort. We worked closely with Caltrans District 3, El Dorado County DOT, the City of Placerville, and first responders. El Dorado County Fire and Police were instrumental in this. We met with them a number of times to talk about the significant importance of access across 50 under the circumstance of the Trip to Green. So like I mentioned previously, the access control plan is essentially the background work that needed to be done to determine how traffic would move around Placerville in the event that the signals were held in a solid green phase for a dedicated period of time. Obviously, that meant that there would be no left turns permitted, and cross traffic would obviously be prohibited. And we were able to determine that there would be right in and right out movements to and from US 50 to local streets on at the intersections of Spring, Bedford, and Center Street. And then Canal Street was a roadway that we determined needed to remain completely closed because of the sight distance limitations at that particular intersection. So as you know, we branded the project as Trip to Green, had a nice ring to it, and people seemed to like it. So we were able to implement the proof of concept during 3 weekends, the first weekend of August, September, and October of 2022. And we needed to conduct that from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. in order to allow for setup and takedown to take place during time periods where there was very little traffic for the safety of the workers that were out there. They used cones and movable barriers, and we had individuals stationed at each of the intersections and a CHP roving the roadway to ensure continued safety. Some of the takeaways and things that we learned from the Trip to Green was that one, it effectively addressed the congestion problem that exists in Placerville. Average travel speeds were around about 40 miles per hour. There were no crashes reported during the Trip to Green evolution. And we also determined through some of the traffic modeling that westbound delays are most significant. There's a really heavy peak of traffic from people basically returning to cities in the West, Sacramento and the Bay Area on Sunday afternoons. And there's potential that this could be really effective if implemented only on a Sunday. And then we also learned that a narrower time frame could be considered and implemented in some manner, something other than 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Also notable that emergency responders had no issues. They had reasonable response times, and they didn't report any concerns about Trip to Green, and they were able to actually trip the lights red when they went through an intersection to stop traffic under the circumstance of Trip to Green. So that was another important component to the project. So At this point, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and dive into the system user analysis, which is really an analysis of where travelers are coming from and or going to. Some of the peak travel times that we see when the majority of the traffic is in Placerville at the stoplights, and then the ebbs and flow of travel in general. We used a very technical travel analysis software tool that uses location-based device data to determine trip origins and destinations. Essentially, if you have location-based information enabled on your cell phone, that can your movement around can actually be tracked by big data companies. It's completely anonymous, and there are a number of these different types of companies out there that do this type of work. But it's very general, broad-based data that tells us where the concentrations of people are and how they move about throughout the state. Not a whole lot of surprises in the data. The vast majority of trip distance are very long or greater than 32 miles, which puts a lot of those trips into or from Sacramento and beyond into the Bay Area. This graph here shows that 51% of the travelers on US 50, and this was taken from the Bedford Avenue intersection, 51% were coming from the Bay Area and 20% from Sacramento, and sort of dropping back down to Folsom, El Dorado Hills with even smaller percentages. So what that really told us is that, US 50 is a very significant and important interregional travel corridor. The majority of the traffic on US 50 is from visitors or pass-through traffic, with the resident traffic only encompassing approximately 7 to 9% of trips. That weekday information was pulled from Thursday. And so one thing to note about Thursday data is that might have picked up quite a few trips where people are headed to Lake Tahoe or Nevada or somewhere east on a long weekend or something of that type. So maybe not perfectly reflective of what things might be like on a Tuesday. But it is important to note that the number of travelers passing through Placerville on Saturday is equal to 6 times the population of the city of Placerville. So that's just a little high-level overview of the system user analysis. At this point, I'm going to shift to the financing and investment strategy, whereby we analyzed a couple options to fund just a couple select improvements that have some potential for implementation to eliminate the stoplights in the city of Placerville or to alleviate the congestion related to the stoplights. So we considered options to use tolling to offset costs for infrastructure improvements, and we analyzed 2 scenarios at a sketch level, which is just a high-level analysis of the potential revenue that could be generated if tolling were implemented. 2 scenarios were considered. One is elevated express lanes, where drivers would pay a toll to use the express lanes and avoid the stoplights during congested periods, and that would be in operation 24 hours a day. And then we considered an option to implement some type of permanent trip to green infrastructure. And I'll talk a little more about that. Of course, this was so preliminary, we would have to do additional studies and figure out exactly how this might be rolled out. But we did want to touch on this to gain a high-level understanding of what this might look like for the city of Placerville. My slide's not advancing here. Sorry about that. There it goes. So we talked about and evaluated the elevated express lanes concept. So the image there shows something, just a very conceptual idea of what this could look like. We did envision that it would be 1 lane in each direction. However, if something like this were constructed, it could be converted to support westbound trips in 2 lanes or eastbound trips in 2 lanes. Could be designed with that configuration. But for purposes of this analysis, it's 1 lane in each direction. It would be in operation 24 hours and 365 days a year. And The estimated revenue, if we were to toll such a facility, is that we would have an annual gross revenue earning of approximately 1.4 million. And over a 20-year period, that looks like about $33.4 million would be the revenue that this would generate. Important thing to note about this particular project is that the usage would be fairly low, 25 to 35%. And the reason is because the signals would still exist underneath this structure. Drivers would have the option to not use the express lanes and just use the signals in periods where it's not congested. So they would be making a time value decision as to whether or not they wanted to use this facility. And so therefore we projected a fairly low usage on this facility. And then the cost to actually construct this at a very high level is anticipated to be approximately 200 to 300 million. So the revenue generation is pretty low compared to the overall cost to construct the project. We also analyzed a permanent trip to green infrastructure. So this would be the concept whereby US 50 would be held to green and access would be controlled with some type of permanent infrastructure like those that are shown here in these images, railroad crossing arms, maybe lane closures for the left turn pockets. All this would have to be designed, engineering designed for safety, but it is a very real option. And this type of thing under this analysis was assumed to be operating during holiday weekends and then 7 high congestion fall weekends around the Apple Hill season. So basically 12 weekends per year. And in this scenario, we assume that traffic would be tolled during trip to green. So there would be an overhead gantry that drivers would go underneath, and you would have either like a fast track or a picture of your license plate, and then you would either have to pay a bill within 3 days, or you would receive a bill. And we did talk about this, that it would include an exemption for local residents. So essentially capturing tolling revenue during trip to green, sort of offsetting the inconvenience of locals for all those trips that are taken that are non-local trips. So that's this concept. And what it will generate in terms of revenue is approximately 620,000 to 1.8 million annually. And over the construction costs, we've estimated at a general level at about 16 million. So another important thing to note about this would be 12 weekends. The toll amount would be about $1 to $3. And this toll would only be in place or active during the time when the signals are tripped to green. So moving along, just a comparison of the two scenarios that we analyzed. The elevated express lanes cost very high, 200 to 300 million, with an annual gross tolling revenue amount of about 1.3 to 1.8 million. And then the permanent trip to green option with a project cost range of about 16 million and annual gross revenue about 620 to 1.8 million. So important to note here that it does appear that the revenue generated from tolling trip to green would offset the cost of construction of the necessary control devices, traffic control devices to make that happen. So where do we go from here in terms of next steps? We have considered a few options, and we did roll these out at our public workshop we had in January, and talked about those with the people who were in attendance. We could do nothing, and under that circumstance, we might see traffic continue to worsen, and the impacts that locals and through travelers experience in terms of delay and inconvenience will still be present. We could consider moving forward with some temporary trip to green options, and that would be, using cones and movable barriers and sort of manpower, working toward that type of implementation on a sort of as needed or dedicated time period basis. Or we could consider pursuing a permanent trip to green facilities with the infrastructure that I previously described. That would need to be designed, engineered, and implemented, and then constructed and funded. This could be done with or without a toll. We just considered the tolling option for sake of considering all options. And lastly, we could consider pursuing some type of permanent infrastructure project, a large-scale project, a superstructure, or the elevated express lanes, or something completely different that we haven't already thought of, like roundabouts. I touched on it a little bit, but we did quite a lot of public outreach throughout this project and received a lot of input, and we conducted a survey, and Celia McAdam here from AIM Consulting is going to talk in greater detail, provide you some of the information about what we heard from the public related to this project.
Thanks, Jerry. Yes, we did a survey of the public, very well advertised. I would imagine a lot of the people here on this Zoom meeting have also provided their input as part of this survey. We did have 559 responses, and over 87% of the people surveyed said that peak seasonal congestion is impacting them, Nearly 57% of those responding said that trip to green made it easier to get around, while 30% said it made travel more difficult. 7% saw no difference, and 6% didn't travel at that time, so they had really no opinion. I think importantly, 70% of the respondents would support future use of the trip to green during peak congestion, and that includes 57% who said yes right off the bat, and 13% who said yes if there were some modifications to it, and then 30% who said no, which tracks exactly with the 30% that said it made travel more difficult. So I think we're seeing some real consistency in those answers there. Next slide. Also wanted to talk about the reactions we got at the January 19th workshop that was held in person at Town Hall. And what the clear message was that the folks there had no interest in pursuing the elevated express lane option that Jerry explained. There were mixed reactions to tolling to help fund the improvements, and that trip to green is supported with refinements to schedule and signage. Okay, Jerry. Okay, we are now done with the presentation, and we are ready for the Q&A part of our meeting. What we'd like to do is you can either type your questions into the chat and we will answer them, or you can use the raise hand function, which if you look at the bottom of your screen, it's under reactions. And if you're on the phone, you can also do the raise your hand by pressing *9, and then after that *6 to unmute. So with that, we'd love to take questions.
Hi, Celia. I see a comment from Mark in the chat. It says, a tolled solution might also ultimately shift traffic onto Highway 80, i.e. send more folks to North Lake Tahoe. I'm not sure if anyone wants to add anything. Otherwise, I can go on to SK's comment as well.
Yes, I mean, these comments will all be part of the record and comment noted.
Okay, perfect. I don't see any hand raises at the moment, but I do see SK's comment of, I'm concerned that local exemption be simple and not cumbersome.
That's
Yep.
a good point.
Yep.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Kathy cannot see where she can raise her hand. We do have someone calling in though.
And I see a raised hand there.
Yes.
Can you unmute them?
Yes. They should
And
be-
then once that is done, then we have Mike Owen, who's also got a hand raised.
Okay. Oh, perfect.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hi, how are you?
Okay, we can-
Oh, looks like we got.
Excellent. So a comment on the funding solution.
God damn it.
Why
Thank you.
doesn't our existing gas taxes already pay and our other taxes already pay for road improvements like they do all over the state? When they need to do earthquake road replacement in places of the state, the entire state pays for it. So if US 50 through Placerville is so important to a significant portion of the state, why shouldn't the entire state pool of taxes pay for it? That's why I'm really against a toll road, because I really don't think you could figure out an easy exemption for the locals. And a question for the control arms for local traffic across 50. We used to have a train here a long time ago, and we actually had vintage, real, old crossing arms. Is there any chance that we could replicate that look if you went with the Trip to Green look? Or do they have to be bright white and orange and obnoxious looking? Can we have a vintage crossing arm if we have to go that way? Thank you. That's all.
Okay, thank you.
Great. I can give a shot at it. Those are great comments. Thank you. With regard to the gas tax and transportation funding, that's kind of a high level, big picture discussion. And, you know, I could say definitely statewide, there are shortfalls with transportation funding that are really huge. Transportation is grossly underfunded generally. And the gas tax is not sufficiently funding the system maintenance and improvements that are needed statewide. So that's why, you know, at the state level and here at EDCTC with this project, we're looking at other creative options to solve problems that probably might go unsolved without these types of innovative strategies. And then as far as the vintage crossing arms, I think that's a fantastic idea. Something that fits the look and feel of the town would be an excellent idea. And I'm sure that if we did go down that road, there would be a creative design process that would go into, you know, trying to make these traffic control devices look and feel in such a manner that it doesn't, it's not an eyesore for the town. So.
Okay, Mr. Owen, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you for taking my question. It's around who and how the definition of local would be defined for that exemption.
Yeah,
Would
that's
that be just
great.
Placerville residents, or would it include people who commute that freeway?
It's a great question, and one that we haven't contemplated in great detail. I know that no one wants to be that, you know, the house just on the other side of the line that says that you're in or out for tolling. So, you know, that I don't think we want to try to answer that question right now. That's going to be something that we would analyze in some level of detail to try to understand and make sure that people aren't inconvenienced by a toll when they shouldn't be, or burdened by a toll, especially those who are financially constrained. So yeah, I think it would be part of a in-depth analysis. So and not something that we're really prepared to speak to right now.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Brady Halblieb, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, has a hand up.
Yes, it's Halblieb. And just a question that I have is, you know, when it comes to local restaurants and businesses in the downtown area, do some of them feel like they may be missing out on potential business from travelers that might be passing through?
It's an excellent question. And the city of Placerville did survey the merchants, and Rebecca, maybe you can address that.
Absolutely. So the city of Placerville conducted a merchant survey that lasted for just shy of 8 weeks. And the responses that we received concluded that approximately 77% of those that participated stated they would potentially support an ongoing implementation of Trip to Green during peak traffic congestion. And that there were reports that customers were able to access their community as well and access their businesses.
Okay, I see Mark Musgrove has his hand up.
Hi there, thank you. Yeah, so just on that point, I've put several comments in the chat as well, but I think, Rebecca, I mentioned this to you at one of the earlier meetings. I think one of the things that, you know, needs to be factored into this plan, and by the way, I completely support the Trip to Green. I think it worked really well. Personally, coming from Chili Bar over to the other side of town, no issues, went around the whole thing via Home Depot. It really doesn't pose any problem to people in reality. But what I think is important is that we recognize the other major shifts that are happening in society right now, whether you know politically like it or not, it's happening. The EV revolution thing is kind of going ahead.
Do you happen to have him?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, sorry. You know, for example, the European Union just passed legislation this week that's basically going to ban the sales of gas cars by 2035 with a 50% reduction of emissions by 2030. The state has also passed legislation that's going to encourage that. The EV revolution is coming, and the city of Placerville could get ahead of that and capitalize on that now by building a very robust infrastructure to attract and retain people who are using EVs in town. And this project could contribute significantly to that if that infrastructure were put in place alongside a Trip to Green infrastructure. If you imagine, you know, somewhere near Placerville Drive or whatever, you know, that exit coming off and then being able to feed people into town, into a facility that captures people and then serves, you know, food and entertainment, whatever they want to have, you know, close by within walking distance, that could actually be a positive boon to the project. And it could probably pay for itself, you know, that way, if you had a deal with EID or somebody, you know, which is favorable to the city rather than a tolling solution. So you'd actually get the revenue off EV charging rates, you know, through a county participation in the scheme. So that might be another thing to consider, is just, you know, how do you actually bring business in a way that, you know, maps to that cultural shift that's really going to happen very, very quickly. So that was just another point I wanted to make. And I don't have any other bright solutions other than the Trip to Green. You know, you look at Salt Lake City, they've got problems with ski traffic. Right now, they're considering sticking a gondola in, you know, so they're actually going to stop people, put them on buses and gondola them over it. I don't think that's feasible for us here, but, you know, there are other creative ways that other cities are looking at this as well, just to flag that.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mark.
Sure.
Okay, do we have other folks who want to weigh in? Questions, comments? Okay. Well, we're a bit ahead of schedule, which, you know, let's hope all of our projects are always on time and ahead of schedule. But all of this information is, let's see, what we should probably do is go back to the final slides of the PowerPoint on our next steps.
Yep. There we go. Okay. I'll take this one. Where do we go from here? Essentially, I mentioned the draft plan will be presented to it'll be available in March is what I said. And I wanted you to know also that it will be presented to the El Dorado County Transportation Commission at our regular board meeting, 2 p.m. on March 2nd. So we'll be presenting the three components to the plan as a draft, and then it will be available for review and public comment during the entire month of March. And then we're looking to adopt that final plan in April. And at that time, this will sort of pivot back into the city of Placerville's purview, and they can take the direction, if there's any direction from the commission, and analyze the content of the plan and determine next steps and how to proceed. And of course, Caltrans is going to be an important partner in that conversation as the owner operator of the US 50 corridor. They'll be instrumental in anything that can be moved forward. And it is notable, and I'd like to just thank anyone if there's anybody here from Caltrans, just thank you for your involvement and support. The Trip to Green was a pretty innovative and out of the box type of concept, and for them to get behind it and support us in implementing that was quite an effort. So appreciate that. There's my contact information. If you're uncomfortable speaking here or don't want to type any comments into the chat, feel free to contact me directly with any comments, and be sure to get an answer to you. So before we close it out, maybe just give one more opportunity for anybody who might want to say something who hasn't yet.
We have Ed Ingram has his hand up. Our behind the scenes folks should unmute him.
I'm sorry, am I unmuted now, I guess? Right?
Yes, you are.
Great. I understand a lot of the options and the progress that's going on with the Trip to Green, but what's going to happen when you decide what you're going to do with it? Are you going to still do a Trip to Green or some other options until these final phases are adopted and completion?
Okay, Jerry?
Becca, you want to take that one? Or
Absolutely. Thanks for calling in, Ed. It's always good to hear your voice. So right now we're in this data collection mode. That's the whole purpose of all these workshops, is getting the community input. We won't really know what we're doing until we actually receive direction from our electeds based off of the input that they're getting. Once we receive that direction, if they want to do a temporary Trip to Green, our next course of action would be that we seek additional funding to do ongoing Trip to Green. If their direction is to go after a permanent Trip to Green infrastructure project, we would then seek funding for a permanent Trip to Green project. In the instance of any other direction, then, obviously the other option was do nothing. And then the polar opposite option was to build the flyover, kind of based on whatever direction we receive. That's what we're going to be going after as far as funding and implementation. But we would, regardless of permanent or temporary Trip to Green, we received some really great input from the public as to, refining our days and times and figuring out a little bit of a better schedule that would work for folks. And that would be also what we would be implementing and refining along the way as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. We have another comment or question, a raised hand from someone calling in. Okay, you're
Hello again. Yeah, I would just like maybe the top websites or phone numbers to keep checking for ongoing information on this process. That's it.
yeah,
Oh, go
I
ahead.
think, we'll maintain the Trip to Green page on the El Dorado County Transportation Commission webpage. And the document will remain there. That's kind of where it will live. And then in terms of future decisions and those types of things, that will shift to the city of Placerville. So I think any further discussion about, pursuing any grant opportunities or those types of things, they could be in coordination. It could be led by EDCTC, but definitely is going to be supported and probably a direct conversation at the city council level within the city of Placerville.
And then also we try to mirror our project page to what EDCTC has available as far as their information as well. And then we do Facebook posts as well.
And I'll just add, that's where you will find the recording of this meeting, as well as a summary document of this meeting when that's available. Okay.
We're happy to take any additional questions if anyone has them. Looks like a majority of the people are still on.
Okay, well, I don't want to take up people's time unnecessarily. I know everyone has busy lives, but I really want to thank everyone for taking the time out of those busy lives to join us here this evening and learn what's going on with the Corridor Action Plan. And hopefully you'll be providing comments to your elected officials on the direction you'd like to see the issue go forward, whether it's Trip to Green, whether it's doing nothing, whether it's the flyover. Your electeds need to hear from you. And I see Council Member Clarici has joined us, and he is nodding that he wants to hear from you as well. Okay, well, with that, I thank you all for your time. Bye-bye.
Bye.